Everyone, welcome to GTM Secrets. Everything go to market, sales, marketing, analytics, RevOps, you name it. Today I have Kristy Morrison with a very impressive background on the line. We've already been nerding out before we even got on here. Kristy, I don't want to butcher your background, so mind giving a little context?
Sure. Right now, you find me actually in F5 headquarters, downtown Seattle. I run the digital intelligence and optimization team here on the web experience team. So what that means is we use data to optimize user experiences and business outcomes. So I own organic search optimization, user experience design, web analytics, implementation, and insights generation, testing and optimization, compliance, which is near and dear to our hearts. A web compliance, not all compliance, but a consent management and things like that. I've been here for, it'll be 9 years next year. Prior to joining F5, I was a consultant. I did that consulting life for 6+ years, I think it was, over at PwC in the customer experience advisory practice, where I worked with all kinds of clients from windows and doors, airlines, tech companies, food and beverage, you name it. To really understand and optimize customer experience across the organization. So I sit in marketing today, but that's fairly agnostic of the work that I do. I'm all about focusing on creating excellent customer experiences, which means a lot of partnership across a lot of parts of the business and understanding the perspectives of those organizations and teams so we can get the work done for our customers.
I hope Spirit wasn't one of your clients.
Incidentally, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
The worst airline out there.
No, actually, I think I can say this now without retribution. It was Alaska Airlines, and I love them still. 9 years later, at least, after being, I still say they have some of the best customer service, some of the best food, and really comfortable, beautiful planes. So I'm still a Alaska fan.
Being from Detroit, we don't have Alaska.
Fair enough.
We're a big Delta hub, so that's my jam.
Boy, I won't hold that against you.
I digress, though. So you have a very interesting background. PwC is incredible. Five is a behemoth. Tell me first a little bit about specifically your CX experience at PwC. How did you translate that to the corporate side? What were some of the key takeaways that you learned as a consultant that you brought to corporate?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. One of the things that I loved about consulting work, not necessarily all of the hotel stays, but the exposure to different clients and different industries and different ways of working. At the end of the day, a lot of the challenges end up being the same. How they go about solving those is often where is the difference maker, right? One of my favorite projects that I got to do at PwC. Shout out to all my radar fam if they ever see this. We had a group called the Experience Radar team, and radar in the sense of data and honing in on customer experience. That the projects that I executed in that organization were really around finding, creating first-party data, leveraging that against second and third-party data, to validate and invalidate a series of hypotheses that we created with our industry partners, with our SMEs, to help drive industry level insights forward. Generating that data and working with that data and combing through that data to pull the insights out around what customers really cared about, what they valued, what they prioritized. Brass tacks, what they were willing to pay for, what they weren't willing to pay for. And do it based on personas and who the target customers were. That was some of the most fun and exciting work. And that really gets at the heart of what I do now at F5, which is all about making data-driven decisions that's informed by industry-wide insights, that's informed by customer and persona information and validated with data, validated against what we're seeing in the market, working with our sales team, working with our product team, to drive those insights out and really action them for positive business outcomes. So that's certainly not the only thing I did at PwC, but it's the one that feels the most salient on a day-to-day basis.
When it comes to, so everyone says, know your customer, right? That's the crux of all of it. Correct me if I'm wrong, F5 would have a lot of personas. I mean, it's all going to be tech related, I assume, CISOs, CIOs, etc. But somebody in a government org is very different than corporate versus an app, whatever. How do you even start to wrap your head around optimizing for multiple personas?
That is the challenge, right? Especially in B2B and enterprise technology spaces. We really have had to pivot away from thinking about a single persona and more about buying groups and intent across those buying groups. And really, at the end of the day, that's a collection of personas, right? Like you mentioned, you're talking to people uh, all the way up to the C level, all the way down to your individual developers who are, or network engineers who are executing this technology and in the weeds with the technology. And so being able to create engaging, sticky, rememberable, I like making up words. That's the consultant in me.
All good.
Memorable experiences across that really hone in on, in a really targeted way, the needs and the questions and the challenges and the problems that those people have across the different phases of the journey is key. And I think understanding those people at the deepest level helps us do that. Listening to our customer helps us do that. I'm blessed to work with some of the smartest people at all of those levels internally, right? So in some ways, we're talking to people just like ourselves. So we have a lot of hypotheses to generate that we can then work to validate, and leveraging data again to help validate or invalidate. Like, where have we gone right? Where have we gone wrong? Is really key in that. Now, certainly data isn't the end all be all, but it is the period at the end of those sentences, and it helps you along the way to make sure that you're getting it right. And a lot of the technology that sits on and leverages that data helps you execute those strategies in really, operationally efficient and programmatic ways, so that it just becomes part of how your go-to-market plans play out.
One thing I do, and you're more of a CX expert than me, but one thing that I do like is you're having somebody opt in. I'm on your website. You have them self opt in by clicking who they are, right? So the by industry, you're already segmenting them, or by area, your solution area, you're already segmenting them. And then I assume that's when you start speaking to the different personas individually. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about taking a fairly matrixed approach to your content, which means you have to be able to speak to somebody at the different dimensions that they represent, right? Much like as humans, we're not just a man or a woman, or there's no binary. You have multiple roles in your life. You're not just an employee or a friend. You might also be a father, a brother, an uncle. Our customers have the same levels of dimensions to their life. They don't just exist in a single silo. Maybe they're coming in from one industry, but then they have a different perspective within that industry. So giving people different ways to navigate the content and your information architecture, I think, helps make that a little bit of a slipperier and easier to navigate, because people can self-select based on the pivot that's the most salient and relevant to them. Like you mentioned, a Fed customer has a very different context than, say, a telco customer. And depending on the problem they're trying to solve, that might be the most salient entry point for them, is to go specifically into what is the offering, what is the solution and the use case that I'm trying to solve for FedGov, because the problem that I'm looking at is very specific to my space. Hey, this is a bit more of a broad, general challenge that I'm trying. And so I'm going to come at it from a product perspective, where I just know that I need a load balancer, I need a WAF solution, and it's kind of agnostic of my context. So then I can come in a product way. And that does get really hard when you talk about activating this on a website, right? Because you can't be everything to everybody. So that's where the data comes in to validate. I'm sure any other enterprise B2B web person has lived through this. We've taken multiple iterations of our information architecture, kind of depending on what we know to be true about our customers in that period. Sometimes it means you have to flip it on its head. Sometimes you do end up in a place where you create, and this is kind of my favorite, is the choose your own adventure type of architecture that allows people to go down the different paths that are most relevant to them. And then, of course, you get to consume the data about how that's working and how many people are going down each of the routes, so you can hone and refine as time goes by.
Makes sense. So other than know your customer, because again, I think that's one of the fundamentals, and yes, people need to do that better. What do you think most people get wrong about their customer experience?
It's I think one of the biggest challenges that I see both as a customer uh in my B2C life, but then also as a buyer in my enterprise world is the creation of siloed experiences. I think too often and I'm not gonna sit here and say that we get it right all the time either, right? And there's a lot of reasons why this happens, but so often and too often, I see companies make their own org structure the customer's problem to navigate. And quite frankly, as customers, I know we all have experienced this. I don't care what org owns the telephone number that I called. I just want you to solve my problem. Don't make your silos, your hard silos, my problem and my fault to navigate, my responsibility rather to navigate. And that's something that we try really hard to solve for at F5 is to make things as customer focused and friendly as possible by breaking down those silos internally so that they don't manifest externally. Some of them will always be there, but we can maybe make them a little bit harder to see. We can make those experiences a little bit more seamless so that it's not the customer's problem to navigate or their responsibility to navigate. And that comes down to even little things like UI elements, across the different properties that an enterprise might have. Making sure that there's consistency in navigation and making sure there's consistency in how things are even merchandised on the site, right? Making little handoffs really seamless. I shouldn't have to. It reminds me a little bit of going to the doctor's office and you have to write down the same stuff like 6 different times. Like, oh my gosh, why do I have to repeat myself? I just told you, why does that data not port over when I'm on the little chat bot, and I'm telling you what my problem is and I'm asking you for help, and then you bounce me over to somebody? Why do I have to repeat myself? Why can't that state be static and be shared with the representative on the other side? So we're always looking for ways to smooth those little edges out and to make things a lot easier on the customer.
Cheesy example, but chatbots irritate me. Getting better, but I would find it ironic when you would put in, the problem that you're having into the chatbot. It gives you a bunch of help articles. No, I want to talk to a person. And then I learned to just copy and paste because it then asks, okay, what do you need help with? I already told you.
Yes.
So I catch myself copying and pasting now, even when I don't need to, just out of habit.
I will say the advent of AI sounds like it's something that's brand new. I mean, I think it's still burgeoning, right? We're still figuring it out. But I have noticed a pretty dramatic improvement in chat experiences typically when AI is present. So bless AI gods, whoever's listening, right? Like, thank you. Thank you. It's so much better than some of the automated chatbots that are more kind of like workflow oriented. And it's like you have to think keywords, like what do I need to say to this chatbot to get the answer out that I want, or just start yelling like 0 to talk to an agent at it like you used to do on the phone. Where's the 0 button? So I think they're poised to get a lot better, a lot smarter, and a heck of a lot more helpful from the customer perspective. And then as a business, they also are much more insightful because as users are interacting with those smarter chatbots, they're having a better experience. We're getting better data. We're not just getting the all caps yelling in the chat session recordings. That's not helpful for anybody either. So fingers crossed we continue to see a lot of improvement on that front.
I hear you. So you and I were talking before. You all use Adobe Analytics, for example.
Yeah.
Marketo. Is your site built on Adobe or is it homegrown?
It is on Adobe Experience Manager. Yeah, we're a very heavy Adobe shop. We use Adobe Analytics, Adobe Target, Adobe Experience Manager, Marketo, all the good stuff.
Let's start here before we even get into more tools. When I think CRO, conversion rate optimization, typically it's looking at, page path exploration, looking at bounce rates, heat maps, etc. I imagine that you all have it down to, a relative science. There's always art to it. And you probably have SOPs, tell me if I'm wrong, for how you look at the data and what to optimize when. What does that look like? Somebody's bouncing, or the average person gets 50% through the page, then bounces. So what? What now?
One of the first places that we start with there is our benchmark. So what is normal, so that we can better understand what is working and what is not. And it's in those anomalies that we focus on. So you talk about standard operating procedures. Our standard operating procedure first and foremost starts with the benchmark. So what's an anomaly from that? What is an outlier from that? And looking across the experiences, of course, based on business priority, right? Like if we've got a key go-to-market motion that's really important to the business, that gets a lot of our attention almost regardless, but certainly still with that same lens. Like, is something underperforming? What happened? What's going wrong? What can we fix? What kind of optimization can we get in market as fast as possible to start turning things around? But then also, like, what's working really well? What can we take and borrow from those efforts that are working? That's kind of where we orient, is again around those benchmarks and what's maybe an anomaly against them. And then of course the business priorities get layered onto that. And then, I would say kind of the tertiary level of operationalization of that ends up being what's bugging us, what's bugging our customers, what great idea do we have right now? If there's a specific new technology that we're working on, like a demo, a tool. Shout out to the Novatic team. They've been great partners. We use Novatic for demos, for some of the product demos on our website. So then, as that's rolling out, as we're evolving our adoption of that platform, how can we focus and optimize based on how customers are interacting with those? So that's kind of the third layer, like I said, of what we would look at for testing opportunities.
How often? So a startup like me, I swear I change something on our website every day, and constantly looking at analytics. There's a behemoth like Five with massive websites, and I assume many websites. Are you changing something every day? Is it slow and methodical? Like, what's your approach to CRO?
Yeah, from CRO, it's a great question. I mean, for my team specifically, right, we're primarily focused on f5.com, which is our marketing domain. I don't really love that term, but I think that's commonly used. Our focus is primarily there. Now, one of the things that we like to reach for is statistical significance. So do we have enough data to make whatever decision it is that we are wanting to make confidently and or do no harm, right? If we've got enough data that tells us that if we do this thing, it's not going to be harmful, but we can't in a statistically significant way say it's definitely going to be positive, that's still a safe bet. That's going to be the key driver of the speed at which we roll things out fully. Now we're quick to get tests out the door, but we also have, I would say, to some degree, the luxury of time. I don't want that to sound like an excuse to move slow. It by no means is, but our buying cycles are long and lengthy. Yeah. Always looking for ways to shorten those, always looking for ways to increase velocity, of course, but we're not an Amazon. People aren't hitting our website buying new stuff 4 times a day, 10 times a week, right? So we do need to really rely on longevity of tests. So as a best practice, I think we err towards a stat sig, and then also as a secondary milestone is about 2 weeks of data to make sure that things have aged appropriately and matured appropriately, specifically if it's going to be a larger rollout. Like if we're talking about main nav type of things, where we're potentially impacting the architecture of the site, the information architecture, that's minimum 2 weeks, right? Because I want to be really sure that's going to require development. That's going to require production resources to execute this change. That's going to potentially require also stakeholder management. We may have to run it up the flagpole and get a variety of folks to say, yep, I think that's a great idea. So you've got to be really sure before you want to undertake something like that. And if we're talking about something more minor like a fix or language on a button, it's not as risky, it's not as dangerous, and not as many people need to say yes to that. So you can be a little bit quicker. So it's about right sizing the level of care that you take and the risk that you're willing to kind of accept depending on what you're looking at. So I try to right size that so we can move fast when we can.
So you mentioned needing dev, which is a given. Does that fall under you? Do you have your own team that implements this, or do you then
Wouldn't
have to
that
go
be
work with
cool?
dev?
Wouldn't that be cool? No, I don't. In our setup, and I think it's a fairly common one in larger companies. Everybody does it differently, I suppose. But in our setup, no, our development resources work in a shared global team. So we have dedicated folks that are assigned to our work, but it's largely dictated by their roadmap and their team's workflows and whatnot. We heavily influence that. And then there's also ways to get stuff done, using other technologies like Adobe Target, I mentioned earlier, I think, as part of the Adobe Stack conversation. There are ways to execute using our technology, like Adobe Target, to create an experience that doesn't require dev. And so there's always those little, I don't want to say it's a hacky move. It's not. Adobe, don't get mad. It's not a hacky move. It's actually personalization at play at scale, is when you're rolling out a change to the site. Certainly if it's a change that's worth rolling out, we'd like to roll it out in dev so it's, live in production, not necessarily reliant on Adobe Target, but that can get us through, right? We can make that change for all visitors or for a subset of visitors, using our technology that we do have and do control kind of in the meantime, while we work to get stuff prioritized with dev.
Well, I think even me, so being a startup, we can kind of do what we want when we want, right? But we'll throw a landing page on, in our case, Pardot, before we actually launch it to, our actual website and whatnot, and
Yeah.
I get the dev involved, etc. So that I definitely understand. Now, switching gears a little bit, F5 is massive. You obviously have brand equity. You obviously work with a lot of the big guys. They all know who you are. But there's also 100 companies trying to eat your lunch as well and take some of that market share. What do you all do differently? You do some demand gen with SEO and whatnot, or the customer experience is different. What do you all do differently than your top competitors?
It's such a great question because I don't think there's a great answer, which means that it's a hard conversation to have because we all play in the same space, like you said. We all have access to the same internet, the same channels that everybody has. So it's more about how you execute and what you have in terms of value proposition and the unique elements of that value proposition to really lean on. And I think that's where F5 does a really fantastic job, specifically around demand gen, if you want to talk about that, right? Like thought leadership is a huge component of how we go to market and a way in which that we try to distinguish ourselves. We've got incredibly smart people, incredibly valuable clients and partners and channel partners that work with us to create some of these thought leadership pieces. We've got distinguished engineers who are incredibly well respected, that we're able to rely on to create that thought leadership. One that jumps to my mind is our SOAS report, which is State of Application Services, which has been being published for, I don't know how many years. I probably should know that before I bring it up as an example, but many, many years, right? It's a staple in the industry and it's survey based, right? We go out, we survey people, we invite people to contribute to it. So it's a real finger on the pulse of the industry at any given, not any given moment, but the moment at which we're collecting the data, and we repeat it every year. So we're able to analyze trends. We're able to isolate and highlight where things are moving towards based on, the industry itself. And I think that investments like that, investments like the SOAS report, State of Application Services, investments like that into the industry and into the communities in which we're participating are where we really shine, because we are really focused on creating and building healthy, thriving, successful digital experiences on behalf of and with our partners. And so that's a very, it's not fully altruistic, of course, but there is a level of investment that is required to do that and to get that permission from your industry. And I think those are ways that we really shine in bringing that to life.
Oh, for what it's worth, this podcast is somewhat altruistic, but not 100%.
I don't think anything in a for-profit business can be fully altruistic, but I'm in it for the win-win. If you can get business impact and business benefit while also giving benefit out to the community, then a win-win is awesome.
I imagine that, I'm equating it because I haven't seen it. I'm equating it to like a Forrester report or Gartner report, that sort of a deal.
Very much like that.
I imagine that there's a ton of time, energy, and money going into that. How do
Yes.
you actually attribute revenue to it, or do you?
I mean, there's always the drive towards attribution. I think, especially in enterprise businesses in technology, especially going back to the buying group conversation is like, how do you drive attribution to any activity that you're doing? Because you need to rationalize it, right? There's a finite amount of resources, finite amount of budget, and there's always accountability. There's always somebody knocking on your door saying, I gave you money. What did you do with it? How much money did it bank for the company? And so there's a fiduciary responsibility for every marketer to show that attribution and to show that back to the business. It's not a clean and easy activity to do, though. It's not, especially when you're talking about sales cycles that are on the longer side, buying groups that have more than one person. I always say this, and it'd be easier if we were selling shoes. And I'm sure like the web team at zappos.com is like, you think so? So the grass is always greener, but looking at the buying journey and doing the best that we can to understand the different ways to leverage attribution models and the different styles of attribution models to fully represent the role that those play in our sales cycle, which also, of course, means a really deep and meaningful partnership with our sales team. And here at F5, the marketing and sales org are under one revenue organization now, which is actually a fairly recent change, but one that I'm really excited about because it brings us closer together and it actually forces us to be part of one team. We're always been part of one team, but it forces us to have those conversations. How do we work together, and how does the activity that we are generating in marketing help feed and fuel the sales engine that they are activating on in those conversations every day?
I have a strong opinion. Back earlier in my career, I consulted with Fortune 500 companies. Now I'm in the startup and SMB world, but I think any company should have a CRO or head of revenue, whatever you want to call them, 1%. Otherwise, the left arm doesn't know what the right arm's doing. So totally agree there.
Yeah.
Here's my last question for you. How do you see in the next 12, 24 months, forget 5 and 10 years because, AI is changing everything.
Yeah.
But how do you think demand gen and the customer experience are going to change over the next 12 to 24 months?
I mean, that's a really great question. I think in the immediate term, I would be remiss if I didn't start by talking about the role that AI plays, right? AI, automation, those are all going to drive, I think, a ton of change, especially as it relates to customer experience. I think there's going to be a more heavy reliance on leveraging AI to help motions like self-service, help people get to the answers and the questions and the solutions that they want in a faster, more efficient way. So I think that's going to have a huge impact on the customer experience. I think businesses are going to very quickly need to get beyond a point where customers know and feel the AI-ness of it, though, because I also think that there's still a need and a desire and a demand for authenticity and human-to-human connection. I don't think anybody wants AI to rule everything. And I certainly don't think any of us want to solely interact with AI chatbots. As friendly as Claude.io or ChatGPT can be, like real people sometimes are the only answer. And so making sure that companies are really mindful about indexing the role that they allow AI to play. I think there's a knee-jerk reaction, especially for the more financial minded, fiscally minded folks to say, oh, but look at all the cost savings. Right. But for every dollar saved, are you able to generate a dollar earned?
Yep.
Right. There's a corollary of that. Like, are you going to go too far towards cost savings where you've created a cold and inhuman, a dehumanized experience for your customers, and they're going to flee elsewhere, somewhere where they feel more of a connection and can get support. So I think there's some right sizing that needs to happen. And hopefully some improvements in some of the AI spaces will allow us to get there more quickly. And then I think there's always, privacy concerns are always at the forefront, especially for somebody like myself and web digital folks who are neck deep and knee deep in data, and making sure that we have as much of good data as we can and that we're using it as responsibly and compliant as we can. And so keeping an eye on privacy concerns, and how that might impact data collection and our ability to use data is something that we've got our eyes on. With the global geopolitical climate as up in the air as it seems to be, it's kind of it's anyone's guess as to how that's going to play out. We definitely were seeing a trend for a while. GDPR comes out, and then Brazil has their thing, and Japan, and then California, and like it felt like we were on a pretty healthy clip, headed towards and then Google, right, with the cookie apocalypse, but now the cookie apocalypse isn't quite as scary.
They keep delaying, and I think they delayed it now indefinitely, but they're giving people more and more opportunities to opt out.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting. I don't have a magic 8 ball. I wish I did, but it's definitely something we've got an eye on. Like what is really the trend that's going to play out in terms of data collection and privacy and compliance, and how will that impact our ability to continue to use data to make better decisions and good experiences?
I feel your pain on that. With what we do at Identity, it's safe to say I have a very good privacy attorney. It is a mess, and every state's very different. You got the CCPA, the NYPA, etc. It's a mess. I said last question already, but here's my actual last question. You run SEO there, correct?
Yes.
How is SEO going to change with LLMs? And I'll preface that by saying, even people that I know that have connections at OpenAI and whatnot, or over there, Gemini, I almost said Bard. They can't even tell you how the algorithm works for SEO when it comes to getting in those results. How do you see that playing out? Are you guys doing anything to tackle the AI-driven results ahead of time? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting thing to watch play out. I think much like the cookie apocalypse, there was this idea that AI was going to kill SEO, and SEO is dead now, and that's just not playing out. That's not what we're seeing. Certainly in Google, who is the player for all intents and purposes, they have, I think, I actually feel like I should know this and I don't know this, but I think their AI elements of search are pretty ubiquitous now. I think they've done a pretty full rollout. At least for me personally, I see AI results in almost every SERP that I navigate personally and professionally. Has it changed the data that we're seeing in terms of like inbound traffic, nuts and bolts? Not really. I think that there's a change in certain aspects of the customer journey, right? So some of those more informational type queries, zero-click marketing is a term I think Amanda over at sparktoro.com has coined. Getting the answers without actually going to the site. That's been something that Google's been playing with for a long time. AI has certainly exacerbated that or increased the scope of that. And so I think understanding that, playing towards that, and understanding that you may lose some top of funnel clicks, that does not mean that you're losing top of funnel eyeballs, right? Because people are still getting that content. They're just not necessarily resulting in a unique visit or a unique click onto your website. They're still seeing that. And one thing that I do like, is, especially in Google, is how they're doing it right now, is you still have the link. They might give you like a synopsis of all the different pieces of the answers to your question, but you can still click off if you want to continue that journey. So making sure that your site is optimized and you're using structured data and schema and all those things to enable your content to be pulled into those as fully as it can be is probably the best way. to get around that. And then, of course, setting expectations internally that like that 0-click thing is real and we might start losing some people at the top of funnel. So maybe those pages that we're used to seeing get a lot of traffic that are really informational in nature might take a little bit of a hit. But if we're still seeing down funnel revenue come in, we're still seeing those down funnel conversions, then it's just a more matter of a mix shift to some degree of how people are consuming our content. And at the end of the day, I don't know that anybody truly cares where somebody is consuming their content as long as it's getting consumed, right?
Yeah,
It's nice if you can prove it. It's best if you can prove it. But the nature of the beast just says that we might be having to pivot how we talk about it a little bit.
makes sense. Well, Kristy, really appreciate you coming on. You have a ton of experience that I think a lot will get out of. I know you're going to say LinkedIn, but where's the best place for someone to connect with you?
Definitely LinkedIn. I'm also on Threads. You can definitely find me on both of those places. Don't participate too much on LinkedIn as much as I would like. I probably should get better at that. But yeah, feel free to follow me on Threads or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.